Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
So we're back today for our Explore section of our journal, which is the second section of our journal. And we've already explored the first prompt, and now we're headed into the second, all about believing in oneself, which is harder to do for a lot of people. And so I'm excited to explore what this will reveal for us in the conversation and hopefully help our listeners, but also, help us too in the work that we do. This prompt reads, believe in yourself and your capacity to do hard things, to make changes. You can heal. Recall a time when you overcame a challenge. Pretend you are a fascinated anthropologist observing that moment in time as if it were a movie playing on a large movie screen. What do you see? How do you approach the challenge? How do you change as a result of the challenge? What else can you observe? If it feels aligned to do so, apply those observations to a current challenge you are facing. How is your approach similar? How is it different? What can you learn from your past experience about your capacity to do hard things and make changes? I love how this prompt takes you from looking at a past challenge and applying what you've learned to the future challenge that you might be facing now in the present. And so I think it's written so beautifully in that way. And my challenge that I see in this prompt for myself that I would definitely want to put under the microscope of observation is taking on a multitude of things, for lack of better words. And what does that mean? And if that is the most helpful for me or not. And so I definitely want to apply the playing it on a large movie screen and seeing how I acted in the past and what worked and what didn't when I was maybe too busy. And now having that information, how does that apply to current and future part of my life as well? So I really think this can be really helpful for so many listeners. And I think that writing about this and being able to, as you write, envision the imagery of a movie playing and you observing yourself in that capacity, without judgment, but also with understanding and compassion, and also really trying to dig into what are the things and the factors that are at play in that movie scene. So that really stands out to me from the start. L Shawn, what about you as you listen to this prompt? What are your thoughts on it?
I love this prompt. It's come as such a really timely for me because I'm facing all these what seem like new and unfamiliar challenges in my new role. I did have a little bit of a pivot this morning because I've been thinking about what I'm missing and where are my blind spots and it seems like there are certain things that I need to focus on in the center rather than outside. I've been looking externally a lot, mostly for resources for the Family Learning Center, and have had a couple challenges that I've faced as executive director in terms of just internal things. And so I think this prompt would really be helpful for me to think about a time when I was able to find a way to address similar issues. And one thing that came to mind, and this is really interesting because it's not like a one-to-one comparison. When I was in Japan, I taught in high school at the first time. I taught at high school as an assistant language teacher. And then I moved into teaching young adults in university settings. And I was doing that for about 3 years. And then an opportunity arose where I could move back to northern Japan, where I had started. My first experience in Japan was in northern Japan. And I had the opportunity to work at a language school. Language schools are very different from universities. They are focused on conversational skills, and the age range is different as well. So if I were to do this prompt and look at the challenge of moving from working with young adults in Japan, Japanese adults, and going into a situation so different from what I had originally experienced, where I was, an assistant language teacher in high school. And then I got my master's. And so I was teaching a variety of young adults in university in Colorado while I was getting my master's. And then I was teaching young adults in Japan at a small women's college. And the shift from being with adults, for one thing, even though they were young adults, to being with children was dramatic. It was so huge because the children required different curriculum. They required a different pacing. And I just remember feeling like a fish out of water at the beginning. And the manager, the person who owned the language school, was great. He came and he observed me teaching and he said, okay, here are some things that you need to adjust. And he was there, showing me how to do it. And I realized that one, I had support in that. So if I look at that movie where I felt like I had to come up with all the answers on my own, I had somebody come in and make sure that I had the tools that I needed, observed my class, saw where I was not meeting the needs of my students because they're a totally different age group and their needs are very different. So, and also the demonstration. So being able to see somebody do a class where they're teaching the kids and I was watching and observing, and I think was a game changer for me, because it's one thing to just talk about what you can do or read about what you can do, because he gave me a bunch of books that I read about teaching young Japanese children. And it wasn't until I saw several of like the veteran teachers and then also the manager demonstrate how they were working with the kids that I finally got into a rhythm. Where I would use this prompt is, how can I apply that to what I'm doing now? It is so different. Again, going from being assistant director to executive director is very different. And although it's similar, there are different expectations and there are different responsibilities. And so what I would do with this prompt is I would ask myself some questions like, how can I find resources, or how can I be an observer of somebody who is in the role that I'm in now in a similar way? Because it really helped me to observe other veteran teachers who had been working with kids, who knew the rhythm, who knew the needs of those kids. And I was able to then incorporate my own skills and talent and understand the rhythm and the pacing of the children. And as I was able to add that into my teaching, I felt more confident. And the kids responded to my confidence, because kids really do know if you are nervous, and they'll try your patience, and they'll challenge you in ways that young adults do not. Young adults are pretty patient with you and they don't like try your patience, but kids, they really do test you. So yeah, that's what I would do with this prompt. I love this prompt because, one, it puts me into the spot of the observer, the stance of the observer. And when you're the observer, the stakes are not as high, because when you're observing, you're taking notes. You're looking at things objectively and not subjectively. And so when I'm looking at that movie of myself, when I was struggling as a new teacher teaching children and making that adjustment, and then I see myself kind of like the montage in movies where, in action movies where the main character goes from novice to master in, really fun clips of them working out and learning all the different moves. That's how I see it, like a montage of me. And I'm thinking, how can I apply those same things to my current situation? So I have all these ideas, and it's really fun. So, Eryn, what's coming up for you?
I am writing down two things here. So, actually three. And one of the things, let me take a step back. The way that my brain framed kind of everything that you were talking about in terms of changing roles and then being in that observer space, when you said observer, it's just like everything felt lighter, and it also connected what's really present here in this prompt, I think. And so the things that I came up with based off of what you said, are understanding our strengths and how we use those, using our strengths in a way that are effective for us to do so. And also in kind of a non-attachment way as well. So that led me to another thing that you kept saying around observation is the concept of neutral relationships. So kind of like in family constellations where you want to try to get to a neutral relationship with money or feelings or certain things. I think by observing what worked for the individual in the movie screen version, and then now how does that relate to today? I think when that observation can be from a neutral stance, I think it can really be much more helpful and rich in helping people understand what to take forward and what to adjust and what to switch with. And I just love this idea of just neutrality when we have observation, and that when you're in the active place of observing your past or your past example you would use in this prompt, I just observe, right? Just take note, non-judgment. What are the facts? What's going on? And when you can get to that place, I think that gives you some levity and lightness to move forward to see how that relates to today. And then the second half of this prompt. And then the third piece is reflection. So while there is that neutral relationship with observation, I heard hints of reflection in what you were saying as well. So reflecting on, what worked and what didn't from the observation, that might have a little bit more of an emotional charge to it, or not have as much neutrality. And I think that's okay. I think that adds kind of that humanness piece to all of this. And then I like how you're able to identify that, these are what my challenges were in teaching and what helped. And this is how that can apply to today in a very different role, right? But also there are the similar themes. So I saw you applying this kind of observation and reflection model. And then just going back to strengths as well. I think the strengths piece is huge in helping us understand, yes, what are the strengths of others in the situation that are working? What is working within us? What is working for us? And really being able to hone in on what is working sometimes rather than focusing to what's not, which is so easy to do. Like, oh, that didn't work, or I did poorly here, or that sort of thing. And yes, as an observer, you want to be able to look at the whole picture. But I think sometimes our minds bias the negative, and we don't often see the positive that is happening in the past. So that came up for me as well. And then just even today, like right now, I just feel challenged. I think it's the weather. Here we finally got some rain, and it took a shift from, being a long-term spring summer mix for a few months to a much cooler day today. And I'm having a little bit of a challenge with focus because I think of that shift in the weather. And so if I were just to play this out with the prompt and go back to a time when weather impacted me, kind of what did that look like? So I guess here I'll try this. So this whole spring was really busy, like January through April. It was just go, 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 from work to personal commitments to travel commitments and so forth. And I didn't really collapse that much until after the fact. But during that time, I was kind of in line with the weather, right? The weather was not as wintry as usual. So I maybe had a little bit more energy than usual. So if I were to look at that objectively, I could say that the weather possibly was a part of my energy differences. There could have been other factors going on. What are those? How was I able to sustain that level of energy from January all the way to March, or all the way till May, and so forth? So just kind of asking those coaching questions, right? Or just better understanding, I think is really helpful. And then today, okay, I'm feeling like I have a lack of focus after I went through a season of being very focused. So what are the conditions contributing to that? What do I need? Those types of questions. And I think it can be helpful for us to journal by not only writing, but by actually writing down questions too. So I think that can be a helpful approach to this prompt, is just even playing with smaller topics in your life and how they're showing up, and then journal on those by asking questions about them and seeing where that takes you. So now if I can get into a more curious mindset about where I am today and just observe. Maybe I need a nap today, or maybe I need to go on a walk, or, maybe there just needs to be a little bit of a reset. But taking the time to slow that down and state those things, me just stating those options, take a nap, walk, that's a mindful practice, right? That brought me out of kind of like the panic, like judgmental, like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough today, or, that sort of thing. And so I think the other piece that this offers is that mindful, bringing it down to the present, not being so hard on ourselves or on others, and having that perspective, which I think is helpful.
There's so much there. There's a lot of richness in your response to that. And what also came up for me was the intention of the prompt, which is believing in yourself and your capacity to do hard things. Because I think anytime that you put yourself in a situation where you're observing yourself, and it often can be to see all of the flaws and all of the ways that it went wrong, or all of the things that you did wrong. I like that the intention of this prompt is to see, again, as you said in your response, Eryn, was to look for the strengths and look for what worked and look for your capacity. And so I think it's really important when you're doing an exercise like this to maintain a positive intention. So when you are observing a past challenge, something that you were able to overcome, it's really important for you to set the intention that you are doing this for your highest and best, and that you are doing it for improvement, or maybe even not improvement, maybe just to celebrate or to acknowledge how far you've come, your progress, how you have shown up in a challenge and been able to meet that challenge. So you're looking at something that was successful and something that you can learn from, not in a negative way, like what not to do, but what to do, what conditions existed in that moment where you were able to overcome this challenge or meet this challenge. So I think the intention is really important if you are doing like an exercise where you're looking back at a situation in your life and really looking at it with the intention to learn from, to acknowledge your strength. So that's really important, I think, in order to avoid self-criticism. The self-criticism is okay, I think, as long as you are doing it in an objective, light way, as Eryn mentioned in her response about when you take on the observer role, it does allow you to put some distance between that situation and your identity and how you feel about yourself. So you can look at something from the outside looking in, even though it's you, and look at that with some objectivity so that you are not judging yourself. You don't want to judge yourself. You want to be curious, like Eryn said. You want to take on that role. That's why the role that you're taking is a fascinated anthropologist, because a fascinated anthropologist is neutral. They're not judging a culture. Anthropologists don't judge, they observe. And they're doing it to learn. And they suspend judgment. They don't look at a culture and say, oh, they're doing this. Oh, but that's not the right way to do it. No, anthropologists, the reason why they survey or they look at cultures is to learn, and to learn how humans interact and the different ways that humans approach life. And so when a fascinated anthropologist is observing a moment, they are looking at what you can see, what you can hear. You're looking at what the interactions, but you're not saying, okay, that was rude, but you're saying this, group of people did this, and the reaction or the response of the other group was this. And then you can make some conclusions. You can draw some conclusions about this. It's possible that this culture values XYZ. So that takes me back to the idea of values. Not only can you get your strengths from doing this activity, you can also see where your values are. Your values can be illuminated in this activity. So going back to what Eryn was saying about asking questions, one question you can ask is, what does this situation or this moment reveal about what I value? So if I go back to my example of when I taught children for the first time, what I valued was meeting the needs of my students. That was a value that I have. And I can apply that to my role as executive director. I value meeting the needs of the people that I serve. And so if I can if I can go back to that value and honor that value and align myself with that value, then I will experience greater satisfaction and it will be more rewarding for me in my role, and I'll probably be less self-critical and more discerning. Is this activity that I'm doing meeting the needs of the people I serve, or is this fear-based, or is this, something else? And so I can discern. And I know that I value meeting the needs of the people that I serve, the children that I teach, the students that I teach. It all is very similar. So that's one thing that I think can come out of this activity as well. Eryn, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I love values and what you said. And one thing you said is before that really stuck out to me is the different ways humans approach life. And I think that is a great phrase to use in maybe even various capacities with this reflection exercise. So identifying what are the various ways you approach this situation or approach life, both, not only in your action, but what was your mindset, those types of things. And then applying that to how could that look similar or different now. I think I really like that phrase that you said. And I think that it has a lot of strength here in application to looking back and then looking to the future as well. And then I love that you tied in values. The values are huge. And it does kind of help us understand why we do things. And I have to admit, when you're talking about your values of really looking out for the best interests of those you serve, I think that's really powerful. And one of my challenges was I was thinking about some of my values. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this out of fear, right? Or like you said, doing it out of other motivations. And so it does tie back. Then once you can observe more objectively, it then ties into better understanding motivations as well, which then I think really relates to this section of exploring your way of being. I think this is probably the hardest section in some ways, because it is truly about you as the journaler / reader and how you approach things and how you are doing them and how you feel when you do them. It's not like it's always going to be great, right? Like you could still feel poorly and still have the value of you really believe in what you're doing or supporting others, right? Like it doesn't mean that you have to always be perfect. And it's actually that's not the goal at all. But on the other hand, I think sometimes in my own personal growth journey, when I'm able to experience and understand what is my way of being when I'm doing something, and that really tells me so much, and it really helps me do things a bit better, whether that's in relationship to others or in the tasks themselves as well. So understanding our way of being is so powerful, and the why behind things that relates to our values, and then how we feel internally. We're so disconnected from our bodies. And I don't want to say a lot of people are not. A lot of people are so in tune, but I am so disconnected from my body so many times, or like there's so much that it can tell me if I just sit there and better understand my way of being and why I am feeling a certain way, rather than just keep going or push it aside. So I think this helps people get to that point of exploring way of being at a depth that leads them on into the next parts of this journal and the next exercises to really free up space to understand oneself and do that objectively as an observer, and also as a reflective practitioner of yourself, understanding, what do things feel like inside when you are leading a meeting versus when you are teaching. Do you like one or the other better? Why or why not? Like if you can't just answer that question from your mind, it has to also be fully embodied and felt. And every job or every volunteer role or whatever has things that we really like to do and things we don't. But understanding that can be helpful. It doesn't mean you have to only do the things you like, right? We still have to sometimes do things we don't like, but it can help us better understand how we show up in the world and impact others and that sort of thing too. So that's kind of where I was headed with thinking about this. And then, going back to how you tied back in the phrase believe in yourself, which is those are the first three words of this prompt. That is such a call to action. And as coaching as benevolence, like we want to see that with people, right? Believing in themselves to live a good life for themselves. And by holding that belief, it does often take understanding one's capacity to do hard things or make changes. And so I want to touch on that really quickly on the changes part. Sometimes we have to make changes, and what does that look like and how does that apply in line with believing in yourself? And sometimes we don't know until we're on the other side of it, but holding that belief in yourself that you can make a change is fundamental to the other pieces of that include taking the steps forward and doing what you need to do. So yeah, maybe I don't know. Do you have anything else on that part, or I guess any parts of the prompt?
Well, there's so much there. I really want to go back to your bringing in feelings. I'm really glad that you did bring in feelings because I think that's really important too. And also the embodiment is also really important. One of the things that we know about like the way that our brain works and our body and like the physiology of all that, it's really important to, when you're affirming something, to include your body in that, because your body can be a great test for the I don't know, like the truth of something. How aligned is that with your purpose, or how aligned is that with your values? And your body can really do that. And one of the things that Eryn and I learned when we worked with Kyla Mitsunaga, who does family constellations, she had taught us, and I don't know, Eryn, if that was your first time, was that your first time learning about muscle testing, or have you heard about it before?
Yeah, so there's a nutritionist here in town that does muscle testing as well, but they do it differently. So I think people do, yeah.
Right. So I don't want to speak for Eryn, so I'll just talk about myself. The first time that I learned about muscle testing is when I was working with Kyla in her early days of her work, before she even knew about family constellations. She used muscle testing, which is a very similar to like scrying or anything like that, where you have like a pendulum and supposedly the pendulum is moving with kind of the currents or the frequency of yes or no. And one of the things that we do with muscle testing is we use our body as a way to test whether something feels true to us or whether something is true for us. And so it's different for what Eryn said, and I'd love to hear what the difference is. But what Kyla taught us was you stand in a neutral position. You ask your body to show you yes. And usually yes for me is leaning forward.
Yeah.
When I asked my body to show me no, it was leaning back. And so then you ask questions that are pretty neutral, that are easy, that you know the answer to. So to test that theory of leaning forward is yes, leaning backwards is no. Then you start asking questions. For example, I'm going to just use price points as an example for coaching, right? Should I price my coaching packet at 500 or 1,000? And then you say 500 is a good price. And then you would ask your body a yes, no question. Is 500 aligned with my values as a coach? And then your body will do whatever, yes or no. So you want to be very clear on the question. That's really important. Clarity on the question is very important. And also You want to, trust that your body is going to show you yes or no in a way that makes sense to you. That's meaningful to you. So that's another thing, just really being very clear on the question, because if you're not clear on the question, the answer may be different than what is intended. And so it's really important to have a clear question. So that's one thing that came to mind when you were talking about it, Eryn, the idea of trusting your body. So muscle testing is one way of doing that. Another way of doing that is by embodying, like a stance, for example. We do this with power poses, right? So you can do a power pose, and it evokes a feeling of confidence and power for you. If you embody what it's like to lead or what it's like to teach, and you embody that, role playing is another way to do that. So there's some coaching techniques and techniques from the healing modalities that play into what you were saying, Eryn, about embodying and also your emotions as well. So how did you feel when you were facing that challenge? You can dial into those emotions. That is information. If you don't feel pleasant, it's misalignment. If you feel pleasant, if you feel energized, if you feel like you're going in the right direction, then that's alignment. So if you can dial into those emotions that you were feeling in that past moment, you can recreate and remind yourself, oh, when I feel like I'm on the right path, I feel energized, I feel giddy, I feel unstoppable. When I'm misaligned, I feel queasy, I feel lethargic, I feel irritated. So those are some things that you can make note of that can help you in the future, in your current situation, your current challenge that you're facing, and be like, how do I feel in this moment? Oh, I'm feeling really pumped, so I must be on the right track. Trust your emotions. Trust that your emotions are information of alignment and misalignment. And if you can trust your body and you can trust your emotions, those are ways that can really give you information. Now, I want to say that with a caveat. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean it's true. So if you're feeling icky or that just means that there's a misalignment. And so you can see where you can adjust, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that thing is bad. Just because you're feeling a certain way about the situation or whatever is happening, it just means that there's a misalignment there. It doesn't necessarily mean that that thing is bad or wrong, or it actually could be something really good for you. It could be something that's really putting you on a better path, or it's a course correction. And so that's another thing to keep in mind as well. So I know that was a lot, but a lot came out from what you were saying, Eryn.
Oh, I love how you brought in the word alignment and articulated not only what it is, but how people can understand whether they are in alignment or not. That's such an important skill and helpful to know. So I think that is so invaluable to this process. And I guess the only thing that's like really standing out at this point, or not the only thing, but one of the things that really is how sometimes we do need to go to that objective observer before we can even get into the body testing or understanding alignment or like, and I don't think it's linear by any means, but I had an aha moment with this prompt that by being an objective observer, that leads me to something that's going to be more aligned than if I skip that part. And I always skip that part, right? I'll go into the feeling within or doing the other parts, but the objective observer takes some discipline and some time. And if you're not used to using it, give yourself grace as you try it on and see how it works for you. But that was really the other part that was coming up for me.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of over time. This was a little bit longer than usual, but I think call to action time is upon us. Do you have a call to action in mind, or would you like me to share mine?
Why don't you go ahead?
Well, this actually is kind of an epiphany as you were talking about realizing that the objective observer, that piece was missing, I thought a call to action to our listeners would be, when you do this prompt, my call to action to you would be, look and see where there's missing pieces. What do you see that's missing? Or what do you see that, for example, you're looking back, so there might be something that you're observing in the past that didn't exist then, but exists now. And play with that. I'm just going to say play with that. Something kind of, a light bulb went off when Eryn said that missing piece. So I want to encourage our listeners, when you do this prompt and you're looking back at the writing and you're looking back at the past situation, that challenge, and maybe even looking at a present challenge, what's missing?
I really like that. I really like that. And I think I want to go back to what we talked about earlier in the podcast about strengths, and just as you look at this prompt and do the reflection within it, be sure to hold that space of understanding what are the strengths that show up as well, because we tend to often not think about those as much. So make sure that you include your strengths.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L Shawn with Michelle's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.